When I saw the new locks on the front door, I didn't feel anger at first, just confusion. It was the same old wooden door, painted the same dull beige we grew up with, but the handle was new, colder. And when my key didn't fit, a strange ache started in my chest, the kind that comes before you realize something you love might be gone for good. I remember standing there on the porch, the evening sun hitting the cracked paint, holding a grocery bag with my favorite tea and the banana bread I'd baked for my sister, Sarah. I had no reason to think I wouldn't walk right in, set the kettle on, and talk like we always did. But that door didn't open. And that was the day everything changed. When our parents died, first Mom, then Dad a year later, the house became the last piece of them I had left. It wasn't fancy. Just a small, two-story home on the edge of town, where every floorboard creaked like an old friend and the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and floor polish no matter how many times you aired it out. I loved that house. It held our whole childhood, the pencil marks on the pantry door showing how tall we grew each year, the tiny dent in the wall from when Sarah threw a toy at me during a fight, the garden Mom planted with her bare hands. When the lawyer read the will, it said clearly that the house was to be shared between us. Not sold. Not given away. Just shared. At the time, it didn't seem complicated. Sarah had her own place in the city, and I stayed in the family home. We agreed she could visit whenever she wanted. It was ours, together. For years, that arrangement worked just fine. Until her house needed renovations. Just a few weeks, she said over the phone one evening, her voice sweet and casual. The contractor says it'll only take a month. You won't even notice I'm there. Of course, I said yes. She was my sister. And maybe, deep down, I was even happy about it. I'd been lonely since Dad passed. The silence in that house could stretch on so long it started to hum. So when Sarah moved in, I thought, maybe this is what we both need. At first, it was nice. We'd cook dinner together, laugh about childhood memories, even sit on the porch after dinner, watching the streetlights flicker on. I'd almost forgotten how good it felt to have family nearby. But little things started to shift, so quietly I almost missed them. She started rearranging things. At first, it was harmless, moving a few photo frames, changing the curtains, replacing the chipped plates in the kitchen. Then she brought in new furniture, sleek, modern, completely out of place in our old-fashioned home. One day, I came back from work to find that Mom's favorite rocking chair, the one she used to sit in every morning, was gone. Oh, I gave it away, Sarah said lightly when I asked. It was falling apart anyway. I remember feeling the floor tilt beneath me, just a little. It wasn't about the chair. It was about what it meant. Then came the mail. Bills and bank letters started arriving with her name on them, not ours. I'd see envelopes labeled property insurance, attention, Sarah Martin, and my heart would squeeze tight. When I asked, she laughed. Relax, it's just easier to keep things in one name for now. The paperwork was confusing. You know how these offices are. I tried to believe her. Because the alternative, that she was taking control of something that belonged to both of us, was too painful to imagine. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon. My office was cutting hours, and I needed to save money. So I called Sarah to ask if I could rent out one of the spare rooms for a bit, just until I got back on my feet. She paused. Then she said, actually, that might be complicated. Complicated? I asked. Yeah. I've been thinking about making some changes. Maybe even, keeping the house for myself permanently. Her voice was too calm, too deliberate. I felt my pulse pound in my ears. Sarah, what are you talking about? It's our house. There was a pause, long enough to feel like a warning. Then she said, not anymore. And hung up. That was the day I packed a small overnight bag and went to stay with my friend, Leah, across town. Just for a few days, I told myself. Give her space. Let things cool off. But when I came back, my key didn't fit. The mailbox was empty. The curtains were drawn. And when I knocked, loud, then louder, no one came to the door. It wasn't until the neighbor, Mr. Carter, poked his head over the fence that I found out what happened. She said you moved out, he told me, scratching his head. Said she bought the place off you last month. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Bought the place? I had never sold anything. Never signed a thing. I spent that night at Leah's again, lying awake staring at the ceiling. My chest felt hollow, like the world had cracked open under my ribs. I kept trying to replay it all, the laughter, the dinners, the way she said, just a few weeks. How did it come to this? In the morning, I went to the county office to check the property records. When the clerk printed out the file and slid it across the counter, my hands shook. Under, current owner, it read, Sarah Martin, sole owner. The signature beneath looked like mine. But it wasn't. It was hers. That's when the anger finally hit me, slow, steady, and burning. For years, I'd been the sister who kept the peace, who smoothed things over, who said it's okay even when it wasn't. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft, wrapped in family love and manipulation. And I wasn't going to let it end there. That night, I sat at Leah's kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, staring at the documents. Somewhere in that house was the truth, maybe in Dad's old desk, maybe in the attic, maybe hidden in the things Sarah hadn't yet thrown away. And if she thought she could erase me from my own home, she was about to find out who I really was. The next morning, I woke up with that kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night, the kind that feels like a bruise inside your chest but also, a decision. I wasn't going to let Sarah win by pretending to be confused or hurt anymore. I called her. She didn't answer the first time. Or the second. On the third try, she picked up, her tone sugar-sweet, the kind of voice she used when she wanted to sound innocent. Hey, sis, she said casually. Everything okay? I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. You changed the locks. A pause. Then, oh, that. Yeah, I had to. The door was old, remember? The lock jammed last week. You changed the locks, I repeated, slower this time. And the deed. Without telling me. She sighed. Look, I don't know what's gotten into you. The lawyer handled everything. You signed the papers. Maybe you forgot. I didn't sign anything, I cut in. You forged my name. Her silence stretched through the phone line, like a wire about to snap. Then she said, You're overreacting. And hung up. I remember sitting there, phone still in my hand, the dial tone echoing like static in my head. This was my sister, the girl who used to braid my hair before school, who cried with me when our parents died, who once swore we'd always look out for each other. And now she was pretending I didn't exist. But she underestimated me. Because I wasn't going to let her rewrite our family story. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could, old letters from my parents, bank documents, copies of the will. The original paperwork had said both our names. I still had a faded photocopy from the lawyer's office, and the ink might have been light, but the words were there, joint ownership. It was enough to start with. Leah helped me find a local attorney, Mr. Rivera. He was a quiet man in his 50s, kind eyes, steady hands. When I slid the folder across his desk, he read in silence for a long time before looking up. This is forgery, he said simply. And if we can prove it, she could lose everything. The words should have made me feel relieved. Instead, I just felt tired. Because this wasn't about everything. It was about home. The sound of my mother humming while she cooked. The smell of fresh paint from when Dad redid the living room. The garden that bloomed every spring. How do you fight your own sister for something like that? A week later, Mr. Rivera filed a temporary injunction, a motion to freeze any property transactions until the investigation was complete. Which meant Sarah couldn't sell the house, at least for now. That same evening, she showed up at Leah's door. I'll never forget that moment, the sharp click of her heels on the porch, the perfume she always wore that smelled like gardenias and guilt. She didn't knock. She just stood there until I came out. Her smile was thin. You had to bring lawyers into this? You left me no choice, I said. This is ridiculous, Anna, she snapped. You don't even live there anymore. You moved out. I stayed with a friend because you changed the locks. Her voice rose. You're being dramatic. You never appreciated how hard I've worked. I paid the taxes, I fixed the plumbing, I kept the place running while I what? I cut her off. While I took care of Mom? While I stayed because Dad wanted one of us to keep the house and the family? That's what I did, Sarah. I kept it safe. She looked away, jaw clenched. For a second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes, guilt, maybe, or shame, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She exhaled slowly, then said, You're not getting that house back. And walked away. That night, I sat in Leah's guest room staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. You're not getting that house back. I thought about giving up, just walking away, letting her keep it. But then I pictured my parents, standing on that porch the day they gave me my first house key, telling me, this will always be home. I owed them more than silence. Mr. Rivera called 2 days later. There's something odd, he said. When I pulled the county records, I found a note about a supplemental document added after your father's will. But it's not on file, it's missing. Missing? I repeated. Yes. Sometimes people hide or misplace addendums, especially if they think it changes inheritance. I think your father might have written a second letter, maybe clarifying his wishes. A letter. That sounded exactly like something Dad would do. And if Sarah had hidden it, that meant she'd known all along. That weekend, I decided to go back to the house. Not to break in, just to see. To remind myself of what I was fighting for. It was late evening when I pulled up in Leah's car. The lights were on inside. Through the window, I could see the furniture, none of it ours anymore. The old couch replaced with something gray and stiff-looking. The walls repainted, erasing every dent, every mark, every piece of our history. Still, I walked around to the side yard. Dad's old shed was still there, the one he used for tools and gardening stuff. The door was locked, but I remembered where he kept the spare key, under the third brick by the lilac bush. It was still there. I opened the shed, half expecting to find dust and cobwebs. But what I found instead made my knees go weak. There was a box. Old, wooden, with Dad's handwriting scrawled across the lid, for my girls, when I'm gone. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed with time. The seal was broken, meaning someone had already opened it. The letter inside began in Dad's familiar handwriting. To my daughters. If you are reading this, I want you to remember that this home is meant to bring you together, not divide you. Should either of you ever try to claim it for yourselves, the ownership will default to the one who keeps its spirit alive, not by blood, but by care. Love. Dad. Tears blurred the words. At the bottom, in smaller writing, there was a note from the lawyer's office, verifying it as an official addendum. Dad had left a moral clause, not just a legal one. And I had proof Sarah had seen it first. Because the envelope had been opened. For a long time, I just sat there on the shed floor, the smell of old wood and earth around me, holding that letter against my chest. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about what Dad meant by keeping its spirit alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was something I could still do. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept thinking about that letter, Dad's handwriting, the weight of his words, how he somehow knew this day would come. The one who keeps its spirit alive. It wasn't about ownership. It was about integrity. About love. About family. And Sarah, she'd broken every part of that. Still, I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. So the next morning, I made copies of the letter and the lawyer's note and brought everything to Mr. Rivera. He read it twice, then leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the folder. "This," he said, "changes everything." He explained that while the letter didn't override the will entirely, it proved intent. It showed my father never wanted the property to be a source of division. And more importantly, it proved Sarah knew about it when she filed the forged deed. That meant premeditation. A few days later, Sarah was summoned for questioning. When she arrived at the courthouse, she looked like she always did when she wanted to seem in control. Sleek hair, red lipstick, sunglasses big enough to hide behind. She didn't even look at me. The hearing was quiet, almost too quiet. The judge, an older woman with a voice that carried the kind of authority you don't argue with, asked the basic questions first. Names, relationship, the history of the property. Then Mr. Rivera stood up. He spoke clearly, calmly, like someone who didn't need to raise his voice to make a point. He showed the forged document, then the original photocopy I'd saved, and finally, Dad's letter. I watched as Sarah's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The judge read the letter silently for a few moments. Then she said, "Miss Harris, did you open this envelope prior to your sister discovering it?" Sarah stammered. I might have seen it before, yes. But I didn't think it mattered anymore." The will. "The will was accompanied by this letter," the judge interrupted. "Which clearly states intent. You withheld it, and you filed altered paperwork. That's fraud." Sarah's lawyer tried to object, but it was useless. The evidence spoke louder than anything either of us could say. When the session ended, the ruling was temporary, the property was frozen pending further review, and Sarah was ordered to surrender her control of it until the final hearing. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was empty. That night, Sarah called me. Her voice was smaller this time, stripped of all the arrogance I'd grown used to. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "We're sisters." "I'm not doing anything you didn't choose first," I said quietly. "You think I wanted this?" she snapped. "You think I wanted to fight you? You moved out, Anna. You left. You always leave. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who kept everything running while you got to live your life." I froze. For the first time, I heard the hurt under her anger. She continued, voice breaking. "I didn't take the house because I hated you. I took it because I was tired of being the one left behind." And suddenly, I didn't see a thief. I saw my sister, the girl who used to share her blanket when I had nightmares, who always wanted to be the stronger one, who didn't know how to ask for love without controlling it. "Sarah," I said softly, "you didn't have to take everything to feel like you mattered." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "I didn't know how else to make it fair." And the line went dead. 2 months passed before the final hearing. In that time, Sarah barely spoke to me. Mr. Rivera handled the legal side, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Dad wrote, keeping the spirit alive. So I started spending time at the house again, not inside, but outside. I tended to the garden. I replanted the roses Mom loved. I fixed the old mailbox Dad built. Neighbors would stop by, asking if the house was finally mine again. And I'd smile and say, "Not yet. But it's home." Because maybe that was what Dad meant, that home wasn't about deeds or signatures. It was about the people who still cared enough to keep it alive. When the final court day arrived, Sarah showed up without her usual armor, no fancy clothes, no sunglasses, no perfect smile. Just a plain black sweater and tired eyes. The judge read through everything once more. And then she said, "Based on the evidence provided, and in accordance with the father's written intent, the property shall revert to joint ownership under both sisters' names. However, stewardship will remain with Ms. Anna Harris, as the one currently maintaining the home and fulfilling the moral intent of the will." Sarah didn't say anything. She just nodded slowly, eyes glistening. It wasn't a win or a loss. It was something in between, a quiet kind of justice. Afterward, as we stood outside the courthouse, Sarah turned to me. "You're really going to move back in?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "But you can visit. It's still your home too." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. Dad would have liked that. And for the first time in years, we actually smiled at each other. Not as enemies, but as sisters who'd finally learned how to stop fighting ghosts. A month later, I moved back into the house. The first night, I sat in the living room surrounded by boxes, the walls still half empty, the air still thick with memories. But when I looked around, at the flickering light through the curtains, the sound of the wind outside, it felt like the house was breathing again. Alive. I took out Dad's letter and framed it. It hangs by the front door now, where everyone can see it. The words remind me every day that sometimes the battles we fight within family aren't about property or pride. They're about learning how to protect love without losing yourself in the process. And even after everything, I like to think Dad was right. Home really does belong to the one who keeps its spirit alive. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought with strangers, they're fought across dinner tables, between people who share the same last name. My sister and I lost more than a house for a while. We lost trust. We lost time. We lost the version of each other that still believed family could never turn cruel. But maybe that's what healing really is, not pretending the pain never happened, but choosing to grow from it anyway. The house my parents built doesn't just hold furniture or walls, it holds the sound of my mother's laughter, my father's quiet lessons, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. That spirit, that love, is what I protect now. And even though my sister and I may never be as close as we once were, I know she carries a piece of that love too. We both do. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, a sibling, a friend, a parent, remember this. You can fight for what's yours without becoming what hurt you. You can stand up without burning down everything behind you. Because sometimes the real victory isn't in winning the argument. It's in finding peace where anger used to live. Tell me, what would you have done if your own sister locked you out of your childhood home? Would you fight to reclaim it, or walk away to build something new? Let me know in the comments. And if my story touched your heart today, don't forget to subscribe, so we can keep sharing stories that remind us, no matter how broken a family can get, love still has a way of finding its way home.